Interviewer. This is an interview with Ryan Dark White. This is an interview for attorney Lin Wood. This is Saturday, January 9th, 2021. And Ryan, if you could just give us a brief background about yourself. Where you grew up, where you went to school, just so we know a little bit more about you. Interviewee. Ryan D. White. It's not my birth name. It's not the name I prefer. Originally from Maryland, I held graduate degrees. I'll explain that. In physics, mathematics, biology, and chemistry from the University of Pennsylvania and Green College, Oxford. Graduate school would be University of Pennsylvania, Johns Hopkins, University of Maryland, and University of Maryland's physics program. Throughout this control that Rod has put on, he has actually personally sent letters, or his assistant, but he signed them. I went to school very young. It throws people off, and he used that against me. He would send letters to my schools, my undergrad and grad. He'd send letters to the military saying that, this person, Ryan White, is using John McGreevy's information. John McGreevy's deceased, so best if you just destroy it. He got much of it destroyed. There's still pieces there that can easily be verified and checked out, rebuilt, hopefully, but he did his best to destroy it. He did the same thing with the military, the U.S. Army from 85 to 96, and Maryland Guard for 3 years after that, 3.5 years after that. Rod apparently didn't know that the Guard was separate, so they have records. He didn't get to them, but like I said, it's easy enough to check them and find them in pieces, and hopefully somebody can help me put them back together. This was just a means of control, a means to discredit me, to keep their secrets. Don't believe anything he says. He's a scumbag no matter what he produces. He's a scumbag. So, interviewer. Okay, any more questions about the background? Unknown female? I don't think so. Interviewer, all right, that's good. Thanks, Ryan. End of recording, end of part 1 transcript. Part 2, background. Interviewer. All right, we're here with Mr. Ryan Dark White doing an interview for attorney Lin Wood. Ryan, if you could, give us a brief bit about your background. Interviewee. Ryan White is not my birth name. It's the name I ended up with for safety. I have a background in physics, math, biology, and chemistry, graduate degrees in those, then in the military, and then as a contractor consultant for various intelligence agencies and think tanks throughout. Then, in the late 90s, I became ordained and was pretty much retired from all that except for a think tank and consulting. But September 11th changed that for everyone. Then in 2005, I met a doctor. We became friends. Dr. Afiq Abol Nasir, a very nice man and nonviolent. He was born in Egypt into the Muslim Brotherhood. His childhood friend from childhood, in the neighborhood all the way through high school, college, medical school, was Avent Al-Azhar Ahi. Their families mixed, but Dr. Nasir did not believe in violence, especially with a country that took you in. He would maintain ties. His brother is the violent side, so much so that Dr. Nasir would not allow his children to be with him very long. They met their uncle when they went home, and Dr. Nasir would not allow his children to practice Islam. So he provided a great deal of information and access to the violent side of terrorism overseas and within the U.S. and their structure, their financial structure, care, things like that, the people involved, and provided many introductions. I started providing this information to local law enforcement in Maryland, and it very quickly jumped to the Department of Justice in Baltimore because much of it was out of state and the crimes involved were federal level crimes. I started providing this in 2005, and in 2008 I started working directly with Rod Rosenstein in Baltimore. And because of the access with the other agencies, the FBI, for instance, would come for corroboration of something they were working on, or just ask questions. If I'd seen something like this, if this related to anything, then it grew from there. Because of the undercover nature of many of the investigations I worked on, terrorists or domestic terrorism within the country, they kept me fairly well concealed and access was limited to a certain group headed by Rod Rosenstein. It became known as the Dirty Trick Squad. In Baltimore, this is where they were using Hammer, Sunrise, Sunset, things like that to illegally spy on people, attempt to corrupt judges, compromise them, Hillary Clinton and others. I mean, it was just ongoing. They concentrated on judges, but they wanted to concentrate on Inaudible. This was done under the guise of a CISSP operation. It's a DOJC SIMS computer operation. It was run out of Fort Washington, but had a satellite office location in Baltimore. They would illegally compromise people, illegally wiretap, break into computers, plant, reverse, change information, change emails, things of that nature. And it was in this capacity of working with them that the information about judges, Roberts, and Pence, and things like that have come out. I've tried several times in the past to get it out and was thoroughly squashed by Rod and the DOJ and the FBI to a horrible extent. I tried again in 2015, tried to end run them and go to the Department of Homeland Security. And once I went there with a pile of evidence and some video and audio recordings. It got too large for them, I suppose. But it made its way back to the FBI and DOJ, and they came down on us again. That was in 2015. In 2016, I made a video discussing quite a bit of this in an effort to get it to Devin Nunes, who was the head of the House Intelligence Committee at the time. But there was interference from one of the people involved, and he messed that all up. So it went largely unnoticed. But in the video, I tried to warn President Trump about the people he was dealing with daily, and especially Rod, and things like that, as they were working together to remove them, trying to compromise the people around them when they possibly could. Interviewer: how were Rod Rosenstein and Mike Pence connected? Interviewee: that group, they're all interconnected one way or the other. That particular group was Rod, Vice President Pence, Paul Ryan. That was the core of the group. Rod was in there, but that was the core of it. It was an attempt, where Rod was a brilliant legal mind behind it, to remove President Trump under the 25th Amendment. They had an operational name for it in the beginning, Run Silent, Run Deep, but nobody really used it after a while, and it didn't make any sense because it was such a small group. But that's an old movie about somebody being passed over for a promotion, which they both felt like they were. Now, Vice President Pence hated Trump because he had taken his slot as rightful president. He felt that he did, and Paul Ryan was actually considered running as well for the vice presidential slot, and Mitt Romney was also involved. But they thought President Trump was an outsider who had not paid his dues. They just didn't like him. So once Vice President Pence was in there, once President Trump was elected, and obviously Vice President Pence, he just walked away and everything became very quiet. That was their mole inside. So he could run interference and make certain things and just keep tabs on the president and manage him. Interviewer: so was this a friendly relationship between Mike Pence and Rosenstein, or was there any kind of leverage being placed on the president or the vice president at the time? Interviewee: there was leverage on Mike Pence because of the surveillance from way back in the 2013 range. They had gotten FISA warrants to exploit, and Rod had that. He wanted the vice president slot himself. Then, if they could remove President Trump, Vice President Pence becomes president, and Rod felt that he would be the natural selection for it. Paul Ryan felt differently, as did Mitt Romney, but that was the overall goal, each one of them vying for the vice presidential slot. Rod thought he was a clear winner because of his legal brilliance and his management of the Mueller investigation and special counsels and things. He would be the one to remove the president, damage him so thoroughly he could be removed, and he deserved it. Interviewer: okay, do you know what type of leverage would have existed over the vice president? Interviewee: the vice president has had homosexual relations in the past. It's not a problem. Many of them were adults. This is something he had done throughout his time in Congress. When he became governor, he had thought that he was free to explore them more. There were two specifically that they had recorded. One gentleman, roughly 20 years his junior. They had a fairly steady relationship. There was one about half his age that was much more sporadic because it was more dangerous, harder to get time alone. This person would introduce others, bringing people with him. He'd have people waiting when he showed up. And it was that second one that introduced the younger and younger people. This is whomever, he's 17 and he's really 15. This is whomever, he's 15 and he's really 13. And Rod and Roberts, Chief Justice Roberts, a lot of the younger people involved, the ones that were brought in as favors, were supplied by Jeffrey Epstein's channels. Through his channels, his people. We were able to get FISA warrants because Chief Justice Roberts had vice court and helped prepare them. But it was also, Epstein was an intelligence asset of some type to various agencies around the world. They used his information. They exploited it for their own good. So when he was here, or his people were here, it was easy enough to justify a FISA warrant on them. You know, they would enact a warrant, surveil everything, document it, but they would not help, and they would not save the child. They would not, reveal it. It was more important for them to have leverage on everything. And of course, this was under their own corrupt ideas, but under Rod, his tutelage, and they wanted the leverage. Interviewer: do you have any idea how Epstein and the Supreme Court Justice Roberts initially would have met, or how that relationship would have developed? Interviewee: how they would have met. I think they met when he was under Bush, not too long after he was appointed, somewhere along in there, just meeting powerful people, something like that. He did help him with his adopted children. From what was said, there was, discussed openly in this little dirty trick squad, the children are not genetically brother and sister, but they're raised that way. So that's more valuable to them. One, if not both, were originally from Wales, but they were in Epstein's channels and were easily removed from their version of foster care to Ireland, which has much more open adoption type records. He facilitated for Roberts so that he could adopt them both at the same time. There was a little gap, but it was just paperwork. And Epstein had done that for him, so they met, they worked together, and he was doing favors at some point. Interviewer: was this something the Supreme Court Justice Roberts would have paid for? Or is this, a favor exchange to Epstein to link him up with these children? Or interviewee: I don't know at that point. It's possible it could be either one. I don't think there would be a payment at that point. It was more for his position. There would be some type of favor, but I don't know either one was done. He facilitated it. Interviewer: uh-huh. Interviewee: was there a payment? Was it a favor? I can't say. Interviewer: okay. Can you go into it any more details on Supreme Court Justice Roberts with these children and the circles that he ran in, as far as you're aware? Interviewee: children are often used as a commodity, a way to buy yourself into certain inner circles. And these people are all wealthy, they're all powerful, and they don't trust you unless you're as compromised as they are. So you provide children to them, your children, adopted children, whatever. This is how they trust you. You're as dirty as they are. You cannot be exposed because you can't expose them. They can't expose you. If anybody's just as dirty, you're safe. And like I said, this is a way for them to buy their way into these inner circles and get access to whatever. Children are the payment and the dirt and the control. Interviewer: now who else would want these to talk to, or is there any additional documentation that we could pursue to solidify what you're saying here today? Interviewee: yep, Yanni has copies of the videos from the FISA surveillance. It was discussed, but I can't prove it. that Roberts has a copy. Rod Rosenstein certainly has a copy. Sean Henry of CrowdStrike, who was FBI at the time, he took 2 copies back to the FBI with him. So the copies were made, and then that was actually Sean Bridges who encrypted them and gave them the keys. So there are copies out there. Interviewer: and who would be on these tapes most likely as far from your conversations in the Dirty Trick Squad? Interviewee: from just those tapes when I was talking about the copies? Interviewer: Interviewee: that would be Roberts. Those would be Pence and his 2 lovers and the younger ones. There were also, they would do the same thing, illegal surveillance and sometimes inaudible. This was mostly in the country, illegal surveillance with Robert's children and whomever they were with. They'd set it up. They knew that they weren't going to be exposed because it's Chief Justice Roberts' children. And please keep in mind, these children have been abused since birth, and I don't want anything else happening. They've already lived through hell. They don't need anything else. But they were getting loaned out for these different groups, and they did surveil many of them. Interviewer: okay, now you also said in part discussions that there was a plot that Roberts was allegedly part of where they discussed murdering other judges on the Supreme Court under Hillary Clinton administration. Can you give me some amplifying details on that? Interviewee: this is something the FBI set up under their guidance. Their political people going to be a false flag. This had gone out 2 years, almost before the election, and it was a sovereign citizen group. Obama did not want any terrorism unless it was white terrorism, so this is a sovereign citizen group that had the FBI had infiltrated and armed and instigated against other targets. They were, for the most part, pro-America, but they were racist in some of their origins. There were a lot of them were divorced fathers with a grudge against the court system anyway, and the FBI people had infiltrated and exploited this. They moved them up to the level of assassinating federal judges, political people, things like that. You want names, I can tell you. So anyway, part of there was various types of attack on the Supreme Court to take down as many judges as they could, and Roberts was aware of this. He actually provided some scheduling because apparently the justices are not all there at one time. They come and go as they please, and these 3 would be working on something, and he provided this to the group so they could finalize their plan. They were very, very close to what they were trying to do. They were given explosives and all types of automatic weapons. They had rocket launchers, and they were very close to it. They were going to assassinate F. Dennis Saylor, a federal judge in Massachusetts, Martha Coakley, Lisa Monaco, and her family. They were going to make it look like a home invasion and film it until later when they needed it. And this was their initial attack plan, and then the Supreme Court. This was a group that got infiltrated on their request. And when I found out what they were doing, that they were going to attack these judges, they were going to attack the Supreme Court, I tried to end run them. I had minders. People kept tabs on me. I had an FBI minder. But I tried to end run around them and expose it. I took all the evidence and went to Homeland Security, who were overwhelmed and called in the FBI. And then the DOJ came right back at me. And they picked me up just a few weeks later when they found out who I was. The damage to their plots had been done. They did get close to assassinating people up there. Lisa Monaco, the judges were under 24/7 security. Martha Coakley had in state security, and it did prevent them from going after the Supreme Court, although their plans were all out. They had the maps, they had the weapons, they had everything planned, so at least it prevented something like that. Interviewer: now, were the teams that were supposed to do the actual operations against the judges, were those Americans or were they foreign? Interviewee: no, these were Americans. Interviewer: okay. Interviewee: a third would be the sovereign citizen group, and 2/3 would be the FBI people, or people working with the FBI. They were going to get rid of them anyway. And actually, I have recordings of their planning on the phone with me, as you know, part of this group. And then they did not hang up the phone. They did not kill the phone. And we were listening. to them talk about killing me and my wife, things like that. And another time they actually butt dialed me, and they were talking about, he was on the phone talking to various people about their plans, about who they were going after and what they were going to do to us, because we knew too much and we were outside at the time. So they could not do their plan. We got the people under surveillance. We saved them, got credit for saving them. They were very upset that their plans had gone to crap. They were upset with me, especially when they came and picked me up, but it stopped it. Their plans were written out. They had maps, they had surveillance, they had quite a bit of equipment. Interviewer: what was the timeline that they were hoping to do this in? Interviewee: this would be right after, within the first year of Hillary Clinton's presidency. She was not supposed to lose. So this was all planned up, and it was more than just then. It was twofold. They wanted to pack the court, and they wanted to take out as many as they could. Roberts was actually helping because he didn't want to be one of them. And he wanted some choice in who it would be on the bench after that. He wanted to maintain some form of control, so he did provide information. But this was to be done within the first year of Hillary Clinton's campaign, so they could ban firearms as well and impact the court, so they have plenty of time to do that. This was their main two goals. Interviewer: do you believe the death of Antonin Scalia was a part of this same plot, or do you know if that was separate? Interviewee: it was the same people. He was a backup plan. He was their biggest threat, being the most conservative judge. Justice Scalia, actually, I believe he found out about the plans, and he went to the White House. Like a week before his death, I believe he found out what they were trying to do when they moved away from the overall attack of where these people lived, or, they would attack around the holidays where more than one justice would be in their home, things like this. And again, Roberts was providing this. But they had to take him out. He was seen as their biggest obstacle, so the same basic group that was involved were given access to the ranch where he was found. They talked about how they did it. They had a couple of different options. But it was discussed prior to his death what they intended to do, where they could possibly do it, how they could do it, who they would need. The records are there at the Cibolo Ranch. One person was brought in. There were 3 men. One person was brought in as a temp worker. The other 2, same team, were brought in as servants for a group that was there hunting. And they discussed how it was done. That they used DISPO, DIMETHYLSULFOXIDE, which is a fairly inert chemical. It just goes through your skin. But if you can mix it with a poison or a drug or something like that, it'll go directly in your system and overload you. I believe that's what he was found with, his pillow over his face. He was struggling to breathe. He couldn't breathe. He was choking. And this particular chemical, you can tailor it to the person. If they have a drug problem, you could put in fentanyl and overdose them. If they have a heart condition, it would take a very little to go directly in. It would be like a direct injection into the heart. And they talk about how they did it. And Roberts is on the phone with these people discussing his successor, that he wants to say in how, because now he was going to be only one person, and he wanted to pick that person. And he wanted a say in who was going to take it. And of course, there was a lot of people there that were talking about Eric Holder taking it, all kinds of people, but he wanted a say in who was going to take over Justice Scalia's spot. And I don't think he got it. I mean, obviously it didn't happen because President Trump was here, but he did want it. And this was all prior, the discussions on him complaining that he wasn't getting any say prior to his death, his sudden death. So it is well known. And interviewer: so aside from Roberts being on this, did Rosenstein or anyone outside the White House, had they been made aware of the plans, perhaps in Hillary's camp, that you can speak about? Interviewee: oh, Hillary and Obama knew about it. I mean, it was supposed to be done under her watch, her term, so they could pack the court. They were fully aware of it. Rod had an intense hatred of Hillary, even though he worked with her. He had to. He's not fond of Obama, really. He's only fond of himself. But this was plans to be enacted through them, and Rod was integral in wanting the hammer system throughout Baltimore. This is why he was the only U.S. attorney to keep his job under Obama. Now, Obama fired every U.S. attorney at the same time except Rod. He was the only one, and this is why. Because he was running things for them. He was involved in their plans, and he was running the hammer and things through Baltimore. Interviewer. So you've also done interviews as to switching channels slightly, but I'm sure it'll tie back together. The death of Seth Rich. Interviewee. Interviewer. And Rod Rosenstein was witting in this operation as well, I believe you. Correct? Interviewee. Yes. Okay, sorry. He was there for their reasons, for the illegal reasons, but he also had to cover himself. When Seth Rich had gone in the first time, I don't have much information on it other than what I've told, but not what I had seen personally. His first contact with WikiLeaks, I just don't know. I do know that when he went to him the second time and came back, WikiLeaks had directed him on how to get further information, and they wanted specific things. Look here, look there, here, because we went in for the break-in and he grabbed a lot of information. Just downloaded everything he could, and that exposed a lot. They were worried about the exposure. The DNC, Hillary and Bowser and Brazil, they were all very worried about it. But Rod was personally worried about it as well, because he had been authoring stuff to affect Hillary Clinton, and he didn't want that to come out, because he would be out of it. He would be done. He would not be appointed to anything, and he had a personal interest in that one. So when it got dumped in his lap to handle the problem, he tapped people who he'd already worked with for years, who were dirty, and he controlled. They owed their continued federal careers to him. He had saved them before, looked over other things, and allowed them to continue their career. And people all around him in one small circle in Baltimore. Interviewer. So it was intended to be an assassination of Seth Rich, or was it more intended to be a robbery, or do you know? Interviewee. Intended to be a robbery, rough him up. All they wanted was a thumb drive that he routinely carried on him, the information he was going to pass to WikiLeaks, what he had uncovered, the more focused information that WikiLeaks had requested. That's what they wanted. He did not leave it at home. He always carried it because he had people living with him, and again, Rod was very upset that this could expose everything and wreck his plans. He would have been done. It was a fairly tenuous relationship, him being a Republican and things, but he had proved himself to be really dirty, like they were, and willing to give access to everything he was doing for them. So he had to recover it, and they didn't care. He did not care how it was done, except for it was supposed to be robbed. They had to recover it, did not care. But Rod put the additional thing on it was get it no matter how. He tapped his agent friend from the DEA, who he had covered for many, many times, and he's dirty, in Baltimore and other places throughout Maryland, and then put him in charge of it. He recruited someone else, and then they went down, and this particular DEA agent is a gang specialist for the DEA. He specializes further in MS-13. He was the one who went outside the local people and who found the two MS-13 people down south and brought them up, or met them actually. They came up and met him, and he brought them into the city, and things went poorly beyond that. They were supposed to rob him, then two guys went ahead and killed him, shot him. He died later. They recovered the thumb drive, which was then switched for one that Rod had provided, the one that Sean had loaded up for him previously. So he was able to recover his involvement in altering emails, breaking into Hillary Clinton's server, things like that. And he kept. Interviewer. So they switched a thumb drive that was on the body for a thumb drive that Rod had prepared to be left behind as a interviewee. Right. Interviewer. Okay. Interviewee. One that would be convincing but not expose him. Interviewer. Understood. Interviewee. A lot of it was the same information, but not because they knew breaches had occurred. So a lot of it was the same thing, just void of anything that would point towards them or Rod specifically. And things rapidly went downhill because they couldn't break into it. It was encrypted. They got it to a couple of different people. They couldn't get into it, and they decided to clean up the mess. And one DEA agent went down the following day, called out, took his wife's car and drove down and killed them. Things like that. So it went bad quickly once he died. It's supposed to be a robbery, and the next thing they hear is, Donna Brazile and Muriel Bowser, the mayor of D.C., were at the hospital before he was even brought in. And they did have people at the crime scene as well. They were there to recover it. As I said, it was supposed to be a robbery, and he was supposed to be, beat up, unconscious, bad shape, and they wanted to recover the thumb drive. That's why they went there. So back to Rod Rosenstein for a moment. What can you tell us about his involvement with foreign nations, with any type of intelligence transfer to groups outside the country? Interviewee. This goes back to the FBI operation called Ghost Stories. It was very successful. They just kept heavy surveillance on known Russian assets within the U.S. Everything they were doing, whatever they found, they were communicating back. It was just surveillance, but if you knew that what you were sending back, then it would go the other way. You could tell people what they were accessing and what they had access to. Thoroughly good operation. It was supposedly very successful. It was Obama and Biden who did the Russian reset along with Secretary Clinton, and they didn't want any problems with the Russians. So they told him to cancel it. Well, they didn't. They kept their communication open with them. It just changed. Instead of just surveillance, they started communicating. They started providing information, and initially it was wrong, but then they started giving it to them in an exchange type situation. Then they started altering the information, giving them inaccurate information. They were working them from the other side. Rod was aware of this. He was part of it at this time, because once it was shut down, it became under the heading of the DOJ in Maryland and D.C. So he was part of it. And then they were giving up this information. They tried to pay him, and he didn't take it. He was like, oh, no, because they were coming towards 2015, 2016 at the time, and he was angling for a big position, Attorney General, Supreme Court, and hopefully Vice President. So he didn't want anything like that to pop up. Well, Sean Bridges was actually taking the money they were offering. He was laundering it through Bitcoin around the world, and Rod was hyper pissed when he found out. It's one of the reasons he went after Sean and put him in jail. He's still there. And so the deal was, you get 6 years, keep your mouth shut, or we'll go after you for everything and get 40. But he started talking, had too much access when he was in Terre Haute, and they brought him out to Virginia, where he's at now, just to keep an eye on him. Interviewer. Okay. End of transcript. Interview with Dr. John McGreevey continued. Vice President Mike Pence. Interviewer. All right, we're here again with Ryan Darkwhite taking an interview for attorney Lin Wood. We're going to speak briefly about Vice President Mike Pence in specific, in as much amplifying detail as we can gather, as to his relationship, no worries, as to his relationships and any crimes he may be a part of. Dr. John McGreevey. All right. I didn't realize I was on. Okay, Mike Pence. When he was in Congress, he had been surveilled multiple times. He is known to be bisexual, but tries to keep it hidden. He puts forth a persona of uber Christian. When he was governor, he was very strict on the gay and lesbian communities. Things like this. To hide that, he was surveilled then. And it was well known that the FBI and CIA do illegal surveillance of many members of, politicians at all levels. To get it, it's all illegal. They want the leverage, and it's well known. They said, interviewer. So he was just kind of caught up in a dragnet of just general surveillance of congressional members? Dr. John McGreevey. I mean, it was known, there were rumors, so they, inaudible, down and did the surveillance through interviewer, just to have a good baseline for future, I suppose. Dr. McGreevey. Well, one, he's a politician. Interviewer. Dr. McGreevey. He'll be around. He has influence. So the FBI is all about getting influence. Now they're dirty, so they control it. It's not like they control it every day. They don't tell them, do this, this, and this. It's just that when they need the big one, they can call it in. And then when he became governor, he felt more secure to pursue his longer-term relationships. Like I said, there's only one roughly 20 years his junior that was a longer-term one that he had when he was in Congress. And then there's one that was much more sporadic, but that gentleman's about half his age. He's the one that introduced the younger and younger people to him. But as governor, he felt it was much more secure, not as wide open, able to pursue it, and he went the other way with his politics and crackdown on gay and lesbian communities. He would never have anything to do with that. Interviewer. Now, Mike Pence is known to never be in public with another woman besides his wife. Do you know that? Has he ever been seen in public with these young men? Was that something he ever felt like he needed to hide, or is it just kind of swept under the Dr. McGreevey? I don't know if he was in a public with him or not. They would usually set up a location that was already wired up before he got there. So, or it was a known location, or the location like the younger gentleman was helping. And he helped set him up so he would tell them when and where they were going to meet. That's why he was the one that was about half his age. I've seen the videos. I mean, I've seen a few from when he was in Congress, but I've seen these from when he was governor and made copies of them. And Sean encrypted them, Sean Bridges. So that guy, was actually working with the FBI to set him up. So he would provide locations where they were going to meet, and they'd be there ahead of time. So there were probably the best surveillance tapes they had of him. The other ones would be this or that, some better than others. This one, you got the whole group. Interviewer. Dr. McGreevey. And when he actually got into talks about being vice president, running with President Trump, they shut it down because they had everything they needed to control the vice president. And it looks like they did. Interviewer. Interviewee, Dr. McGreevey. So then of course, he was involved with the other stuff with Rod Rosenstein and Roberts to get President Trump out of there. Paul Ryan and Romney, those are the people most involved in it. They wanted to get to President Trump in any way possible so he wouldn't become president. He felt that he had been passed over, he was due, it was his perfect time. And he actually ran for president in the election and was quickly surpassed by President Trump, so he felt slighted and did not like President Trump for any reason, especially that one. Interviewer. So there is an active plot between Mike Pence and Rod Rosenstein and Ryan and Dr. McGreevey. Romney. Interviewer. Mitt Romney. Interviewee. Interviewer. Can you discuss what you might have looked like? Interviewee. They wanted to remove him in any way possible. They had worked with Roberts prior to the actual election, and Roberts had actually helped them write up FISA warrants with Pete Strzok. And, inaudible, would write them up, maybe, and Roberts would send them off to be signed by whoever judge he controlled. But they had started this, but once he was elected, once Rod was appointed, the focus shifted to Rod Rosenstein, and that was up to him, using the guidance of what they wanted to do, and he coordinated with all the deep state Democrats, whatever you want to say, to take him down. The Russian collusion with Mueller and Comey, who were involved in it, they were the ones getting information back and forth from various governments. They were the ones handling the information from ghost stories. That continued. That was then. Now Mueller ran ghost stories from way back. Interviewer. Okay. Dr. John McGreevey. So they were all involved in it, and they were trying to remove President Trump in any way, shape, or form. It was Rod who wanted to go after the 25th Amendment. And he has definitely worn a wire before. So it wasn't a joke. It was a serious threat, and they tried it many, many times. Interviewer. Okay, are you aware if President Trump was ever made aware of this during the administration as far as underhand dealings that Pence is associated with? Interviewee. I don't know for sure. I had hoped. I made a tape in 2016 in Baltimore with this one group, and it was made expressly to get to Devin Nunes. But there was a member of this group he was just unprofessional. It was all about him. When they saw what was on it, Devin Nunes was very impressed with it, as was Kash Patel, and they wanted the rest of it. He had only given them about a 20-minute sample of a 3.5-hour tape. But he got in the middle of it. He wanted to control it. He wanted everybody to come to him for the source. And I was just like, just give it to them. They need to know. This was right after Rod had been tapped for DAG, but not accepted. He accepted it, but he hadn't taken the office yet, and I'm trying to warn him about what he's really like, and he's working with Pence, and it's like, this is going to be terrible. Then this guy got in the way and screwed it all up. So by the time, interviewer, this is Matt Couch. Interviewee, yes, lumpy love seat. That's him. But yeah, he messed it all up, and he wanted to get in the middle. He wanted to be the hero. It was all about him and the donations. And he immediately turned on Mr. Brutowski. He's a very kind man who wanted to really help. They wanted everything immediately. He wouldn't do it. He's negotiating with him for weeks and weeks. And then by the time they finally got a copy, it was a blank copy. It was just bad. All. Yeah, he screwed it all. And once it finally got to them, they had moved on. He really ruined it. And he ruined the warning. Because I told him, I said, now, here's me. It's on the video. It's me. I've got my background. I don't care. Give it to them. He needs to know this. I thought it was very exciting, President Trump's presence, and he messed it all up. So, interviewer. Okay. Dr. John McGreevey. People tried. Interviewer. Can you give me some more details on the hammer, sunrise, sunset, and how the leak, that spy ring, was working at the time? Interviewee. Like I said, and these are software what? Unknown female. No. Interviewee. Oh, I thought you were waving. Okay. These are software. They're software. You can tailor it to what you want. Hammer's the big one. There's sunrise, and one that's also military but narrowly focused. Sunset is the same thing, but focused more on the surveillance side that they would use to exploit, phone records, computers, things like that. It was more of a civilian version of it. Interviewer. Is this Hammer the supercomputer as they mentioned lately in the Hammer scorecard with the recent election? Interviewee. Yes. Interviewer. Okay. Interviewee. There were people involved in the vote manipulation. They had taken care of that as well, because they were using it not just in the election. They used it in 2018. It was a setup from 2016 when they lost a lot of their control over the satellite stuff, so they moved it overseas. That's Dr. Molly McCauley. That was her forte. That's why she's no longer with us. But as far as Hammer, it was running out of Fort Washington, but the satellite service was in Baltimore, and it was a CISSP computer. It was computer crimes, internet, things like that. So it's the DOJ supercomputer. It's hooked into everything, and it was run through there. Individual pieces, you could drive out and find an open port and go through the post office or porn sites or FedEx or whatever you wanted. And the VA was wide open in many spots. So that was one of their favorite ones that Sean and the other people used to go through and infiltrate and get access and then come back and do what they needed to do. They went through the post office to place child porn on Miss Atkinson's husband's computer, and that was Sean. So they attempted to remove it later, and it didn't get all of it. But so that was just how they operated. And this is normal, everyday, completely illegal, but normal, everyday business for them. Interviewer. Okay. Is there any additional information we can get on Pence for this that would, as far as shine a light on current events being what they are here? Interviewee. Well, I mean, he was always a snake in the grass. He was the mole. He never liked Trump, and he was the only one to act like, he's to get him in this position. And all I've seen recently, what he did with it, and it was preparing for that the whole time. In 2016, I tried to warn the president of what was going on, especially Rod-centric, what, he was working with these people and what they had planned, but it didn't get there, as we discussed. But he's a scumbag. I mean, he's compromised. He's been compromised. He knows it. And then, interviewer. Have you ever heard of any foreign interference or any type of affiliations outside the country with Pence? Interviewee. With Pence specifically, a lot of stuff was given to Iran and China. A lot of software, the programs, things like this. A lot of tech was given to Iran, which immediately ended up in China's hands. And then, inaudible, China. In 2016, actually before the Mali had discovered the satellites were being used to manipulate elections. And it was used in 2016. Huge. Just like we've seen recently. And then they lost control of that when President Trump won. So in 2018, a lot of that had already been transferred overseas. Iran, Italy, China. And then I wrote about that a couple of years ago, about what they had done. So they had already exposed all that. It had already gone over there. So they went kind of old school in 2018 to take over the Congress, to get Nance inaudible. They had recooked the books on as many as they needed, much lower key. This time they just went nuts with it in every fashion. Interviewer. Okay, now Pence's wife, how winning is she in all this pedophilia and all of this? Dr. JON McGreevey. She covers it up for him. She's completely a political animal. One of the reasons that the younger guy was sporadic is she felt it was more dangerous and was harder to control. He'd pop up. It wasn't something necessarily scheduled. I mean, he'd pop up and then it would be scheduled later, but it wasn't something that was set. So to her, it was much riskier, but she was the manager for the interviewer. Okay. Interviewee. She's the one who kept it quiet. Interviewer. Would she be aware of the pedophilia as well with the young children? Interviewee. Oh, sure. Interviewer. Yeah. Interviewee. I mean, it's not like he hid this stuff from her because she managed it. Interviewer. Uh-huh. Interviewee. And she's interviewer. Just as complicit. Interviewee. Huh? Interviewer. She's complicit in this. Interviewee. Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. She knew all about that, and she knows all about it for a very long time. And so is Roberts. I mean, Roberts is flat out gay. At least he is now. He has been ever since he was a child, which is nothing wrong with being gay, but you're high and manipulating stuff, and so... Interviewer. Okay, do you have any questions for him on Pence? Unknown female. I guess I was just wondering how he's been able to keep all that from his public life. Interviewer. Yeah, what is your opinions on how he's been able to keep that so quiet? Interviewee. Pence? Interviewer. Yes. Unknown female. Yeah. Interviewee. Well, I mean, the company he kept in Congress were all the same thing. They're all under surveillance. They're all dirty in one fashion or another. So many of them are dirty. It's very disarming. And his wife manages his stuff. And he could do deals if something did come out. They could quash it. They could make a deal. They could, if something was hinted at, they could address it because he had his political power, either there or governor or whatever. So I'm sure things came out, as they do for most of them, but things go away too, especially. Unknown female. Were you aware of any of this going on from 2016 to 2020 in the White House or anything? Or did he keep it all outside? Interviewee, Dr. John McGreevey. Oh, his male relationships? Unknown female, yes. Interviewee. I don't know if he maintained them after the election. It was so important to keep him buried. You know, run silent, run deep. That's how they described it. They wouldn't save him. He did provide info. He actually let stuff leak. He let stuff leak from certain conversations the president had with a staffer. So the staffer he blamed because it was somebody that Mike didn't care for, and it got out. The president blamed them because of the prior conversation, but it actually wasn't them. Not in all cases, but some. At that point, I don't know if he had any other relationships or maintained the same ones because I just didn't have access anymore to it, so I can't say. But it was most important to them to keep it quiet or keep him under control because that's what was the ace in the hole they needed. Interviewer. All right, well, thanks. End of recording, end of transcript. Dirty Trick Squad. Interviewer. All right, so I'm going to ask you if we could get into some more of the details with the Dirty Trick Squad and how Rosenstein was a part of that group, and if Roberts had any type of interaction with the group as well. Interviewee. Dirty Trick Squad was just a nickname. It certainly wasn't anything official. This was a group of people that were either dirty or they controlled. I was one that was controlled. There was Rod, Sean, Henry. He was FBI. Sean Bridges, Secret Service. Joseph Rosati, who was with the DEA. Alan Boroshak was ATF. Gregory Utz, who was the TFO with the DEA, but he was formerly Baltimore County Police. That was the basis of the Dirty Trick Squad. You had the computer experts, you had the muscle, you had the tactical experts, and that's what they were doing. And then there was another group in Fort Washington. He was running one down there. This one was the satellite location in Baltimore for really illegal stuff. Illegal communications, hacking, phone tapping, you name it. They concentrated their main focus all the time, Title III, judges, federal judges. But they would go after anyone, political rivals, sitting politicians, anybody they needed to go after. Anybody that they were pointed at, they went after family members of judges and compromised people as much as they possibly could. They had no problem hacking computers and planning information to compromise people. This is something they had done numerous times. Rod had done this for years and years, so had Sean Bridges, where they would finagle a case that they had before the court where, for instance, they would arrest a gentleman and he had money, he had property, and he had resources to fight them. They didn't like that. So Sean would go in, plant child porn on their computer, and you know what? Oh, the examination. Now you got this on there. I don't know anything about it. Well, it's on there. We're going to charge you. And then he didn't want to ruin his life. He didn't want to go to prison as a pedophile. You know what happens and things. And they would use this as leverage in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cases. And then he would plead, the person they charged would plead guilty to a lesser charge that would not show up on the record, but he would have to forfeit property, money, things like that, and they would skim their percentage off. Sean Bridges was particularly good at it. It was his specialty, and he had done this at the county and state levels and got in trouble a couple times, which is why he came under the sight of Rod Rosenstein, who got him up to the federal. Sean did not like Obama. Didn't like Hillary. He had access to the White House, the Air Force One, the CIA. He had those kind of clearances as the #1 expert on forensic study of the computers for the Secret Service, then for most of the government. Interviewer. Now, was he a government employee? Was he a contractor? What was? Interviewee. He was Secret Service. He was a Secret Service agent. Interviewer. Okay. Interviewee, Dr. John McGreevey. A full Secret Service agent. So he had access to all of these things because his clearances, because of his expertise, he could go anywhere. He was often in the White House, texting the location of the president and Obama and what they were doing. He hacked into Obama's BlackBerry just for fun. Things like that. And shared messages with people. Hacked the girls' phones. I mean, it was nothing. He had a list of people that he would just call up and watch them do their daily stuff. He's just a truly gifted with computers. I'm good at computers. I can do any of it you need. But he's just one of those people born to do it. He can do it like breathing. He's a violent person, which belies his size. He's only about 5'9", 5'8", and maybe 120 pounds when he's not drinking. But he's a violent person and arrogant, and he's all about the money. This was a core group of the Dirty Trick Squad. And that's all they did was hack people, steal information, alter emails, manipulate things, and sell intelligence, launder. Sean Wesley Bridges, the Secret Service agent, was the foremost expert on e-commerce and Bitcoin. That's what he's actually in prison for. And their illegal profits that they would skim off or that they would target people with cash or different bank accounts. Anything they could skim, they would run it through Bitcoin. He'd launder it for them. And he still holds millions of dollars online in various accounts. He also holds several passports and will disappear as soon as he's released. Interviewer: do you know where he'll disappear to? Interviewee: Central or South America. He's discussed Argentina and Colombia as possibilities because his wife's family is from there. They have a family there. He was able to purchase illegitimate passports and documents from governments in South America, and he has the money to do so. He's all about the money. Interviewer: can you tell me about Alan Borishak? Interviewee: Borishak. He's ATF. He's retired now. He's a nasty piece of work. He gets involved in his official capacity with the illegal gun running for Fast and Furious. He was the one that made sure the paperwork stayed clean and things came back in the country. They were spying. Guns, supposedly, that would be tracked. Then he made sure things stayed clean as far as serial numbers. Things like that. He's been dealing his guns his entire career, as far as I know. He has lots of disposable money at his disposal. He has lots of cash at his disposal. Things like that. He lives very well. When Rod started falling out of favor as the DAG, they felt that there was already thoughts. Borishak, they felt that their protection was leaving. So Borishak and Rosati both divorced their wives. No contest. Put everything in her name. Paid off their existing house with, I think Rossetti, it was over $300,000. And Borishak, it was even more in cash. Bought another house with like $250,000 cash down payment. Lived there. Rosati lived with his wife that he just divorced. Interviewer: now, when you say cash, you mean by transfer or by hard cash? Interviewee: they actually had cash to pay all things. Interviewer: okay. Interviewee: and we're able to come up with large checks as well. But yeah, actually, he lived with his wife. He always had cash. Now, if you look at him on the surface, he's barely getting by DEA agent who owes money to several people. Interviewer: is this Rosati or? Interviewee: Rosati. Interviewer: oh, it is. Okay, could you do Borishak? We'll get to Rosati in a second. To keep it all straight. Interviewee: Borishak, gotcha. Borishak divorced his wife. At the same time as Rosati paid off the house, gave her about $600,000 as part of the settlement, put everything in her name after paying the house off in cash, bought a large condo on the Potomac for himself, has a custom van filled with road race bikes that he likes to bicycle. These are all $10,000, $12,000, $15,000 bikes that are custom made for him, his size. They measured everything. This is just one of his hobbies. He's got watercraft and cars and all kinds of stuff. Never has a problem finding cash because he's dealing guns, and he helps people clear stuff up that is out there. He helped buy the firearm for Seth Rich. Interviewer: okay, very good. So now on to Rosati, Joseph Rosati. Interviewee: Interviewer: let's discuss. I know you've got a little bit more information on him than some of the others. So, interviewee: Rosati's a DEA steroid freak. He's like 6'2" or so, a big bodybuilder. He's a violent, nasty, lying person. He always has been. It's not like just me saying it. This is the other people that he's worked with. Other agents have complained about the same thing. There are dozens of cases where he has added drugs to stings. There's an instance where there's one drug case. There were 15 agents involved, and the only complaints in the case came from people being arrested were about Rosati, and the exact same complaint from the agents. He always has to be the one to swoop. He never did any work. He's always the cowboy, had to be out on his own. He's always the one to swoop in with his big bust. 14 agents would find 30 pounds of marijuana, and he would swoop in all by himself out of nowhere and, I got a kilo of coke, and make the big bust, and they complained. Agents on numerous cases and in numerous locations would complain about him doing this. He's also been sued many times by people who flat out said, I'm a drug dealer. I sell marijuana. I've never touched the other stuff. It's all I've ever sold. I don't believe in it, but he added to it. The exact complaints over and over again from not only, defendants, but agents working with him. And when things would get too bad, they would just move him off to another region, another district. But he's a nasty, violent person that I've personally had to deal with. Interviewer. Now, you mentioned in a previous tape that he and Borashak were involved in the Seth Rich murder. Are there any other murders that you know of or have heard of that he may be associated with? And if so, how were these perpetrated? Interviewee. Borashak was involved. He supplied the firearm and made it disappear after, or he got it destroyed. Rosati was involved with Seth Rich. He was there. He's the one that picked up the MS-13 people outside the city and brought them in and got them out of the city. He brought Kevin Dougherty with him. Kevin Dougherty was kind of a hang-around wannabe federal agent, sucked up to them continuously to get an appointment. He's a big wannabe, always had a different story about his background. He's apparently did almost a year in the Marine Corps many, many years ago. But they used him as kind of a gopher, and he was there that night. Kevin Dougherty's actually the one who attempted to kill Jack Berkman later on because he was being exposed in the crime, and he's in prison for that now. So they've been involved in other murders. This is Borashak and Rosati. They're very tight. They would do things where they would of course, selling guns to gang members later, resulted in murders, deaths, and they would call it fishing. They would sell them off. Sometimes they'd even leave them there. They would come up. It was very easy for them to come up with firearms. They would sell them off, and then Borashak would, trace the serial numbers and see if it was related later on down the road to any shootings or deaths. It was fishing. That's what they called it. Fishing. And see if they got one, because to them, it was great. Interviewer. This is similar to the Fast and Furious idea. Interviewee. Yeah, it was just their version of it. Interviewer. Just a local version or interviewee? It was their version, same time, the exact same time frame they were doing, but they would track serial numbers just to see if they got it that could have been used in a crime, At one point, I thought they were even keeping score, but they would just celebrate. They just thought it was funny that they'd made money and they killed each other and ha ha ha, great fun. Interviewer. Richard Rosati has been known to use poison on people. Interviewee. He's been known to help people overdose, give them hot shots, pure drugs to shoot them, to kill them, to overdose them. He's done this to informants, things like that he's used, and he's used it several times as far as I know that he's bragged about. Informants. Because he'll have informants, and then he'll start dealing with them, start dealing drugs with them. He'll start moving product to them, especially pills. And then when they think they have enough leverage on him, they come back and have something. Well, they'll just set them up, they'll overdose, and they're gone. So yeah. Interviewer. Okay. You mentioned that he's also involved in pharmaceutical. Interviewee. Oh yeah. Interviewer. Pharmacy fraud and interviewee. Pharmacy. Yeah. Pharmaceutical. I don't think he's got the brain for it. He, as a DEA agent, he uses his authority to manipulate pharmacies in shipping and inspections. The DEA inspects pharmacies once a month, especially the narcotic shipments. Generally, the pharmacies are divided. All the medications are over here, are narcotics, and they're supposed to be inspected. Well, he would oversee the inspections, and he'd write them off if they had more. If they had less, then he would move them through there. He could sign off on it, and everything looked fine. You know, the numbers would match up. They accounted for more for everything, and yet they got 30,000 more pills sitting there because they're selling it for him. And they did all kinds of stuff. They would short prescriptions. But it was just the pharmacies ordering these massive amounts of opioids that he was working with. And he would take them and sell them on the streets, sell them to another pharmacy, move them through another pharmacy, and another one getting paid for it. And he was manipulating their inspections is what he was doing there. And then when, again, they became problematic or didn't want to do it anymore or felt that they were too exposed or local police had come to their door because they'd heard something, he would boom, I don't know, I'm DEA. And he would distance himself and shut them up, threaten them, or go that way. Interviewer. Now, you mentioned he had a cousin that looked similar to him. Interviewee. Oh, yeah, he'll do anything for money. He's crap. He's a large guy. He's like 6'2" or so, and a big bodybuilder. He has a cousin that looks almost like him, but he's skinny, just the face. The cousin, this is the little stuff. The cousin would go into banks with his ID, with his real ID, and he would give it to him, and he'd go in and open up bank accounts, credit lines, things like this. And they'd max them out, just ruin, bounce checks and credit cards, everything they could possibly get. Then when it finally hit the fan and, the bank started collecting on the credit agency started collecting, he would go into the bank as a DEA agent and say, who opened this account? It was like, well, this is me. Here I am. It was like, am I the one that opened it? Well, no, you're enormous. Obviously, I'd remember you. And then it goes away and it wasn't him. He's done this with lots of times. He had another scam where he actually got the other agent shot because of this one, where he was calling as a phony DEA agent, calling people around the country randomly, telling them that a package had been intercepted and it had your name on it. It's drugs, or it's drug precursors, things like that. It's not the country yet, but it's coming. If it gets in the country, I'm going to charge you, but if you pay a fee, a fine now, $1,200, $800, whatever, it'll never get here. And he got lots of people to pay it. A lot of people would con. A lot of people would be like, oh, no, I'm not doing that. And they contacted the DEA. And it turned out that he was actually the DEA's point man on those complaints. So he was running. He would run that scam. If anything came back, it went to him anyway. But he eventually did get caught on that because this is a nationwide scam. People all over the country doing this. Because 3 numbers he used to do these calls went to the payphone outside of where he worked. The payphone at the gas station about a block and a half from his house, and to a burner phone he was known to use, so not smart. And then a few of these people were able to record the conversation on the phone as evidence, and they had an app or something. And then when they called, they got switched around, and everybody was like, it's the same guy, They were like, holy crap, and it was like, then, inaudible, didn't know what was happening. But because of that, because of the phony DEA, because of people trying to make these phony arrests, there were actually real agents enacting a high-risk warrant in California who got shot. The guy just, as soon as they knocked, they had a warrant, they identified themselves, and he just fired them up because he heard about the phony agents, and it was because of him. He got his own agent shot, and he doesn't care, so that's how he is. Interviewer. Okay, the final thing on Rosati, you've mentioned before, that he's working with local mafia people in the Maryland area. Conowingo Pizza has been mentioned in the past. Can you give me more details on how that works? Interviewee. Okay, it's, a whole new realm of stuff to worry about. Yeah. He protects certain people who can provide him with what he needs, more money. This relationship he's had for quite a while, and it's Conowingo Pizza on Route 1 in Cecil County, Maryland. It's a small place. Conowingo is not very big at all. But it's run by little Tony Anthony. His father, Big Tony, who is connected to the mafia in New Jersey and New York, he runs the pizza place. But little Tony owns everything up there. He owns stuff on Route 40 all the way out. He owns millions and millions of dollars in real estate that he rents and everything. That all came from drugs. Rosati has worked with him for many years, so have the local police up there. And he's just not touchable. But this is his steady supplier, his steady source. They bring him in the drugs. Once a week, they bring in dough from New Jersey in one of their trucks. It varies which one, but one of those is a drug shipment, and it's brought in, broken down, and taken out. It's only once a month. And there's a lot. You're talking hundreds of pounds of drugs being broken down. Many of it, a lot of the heroin that's being brought in could be, a couple of 100 pounds of heroin is actually broken down and taken down into Baltimore and D.C. Interviewer. Mostly heroin dealer then? Interviewee. He is now. He used to be more coke, some pills, things like that, but the heroin has jumped way, way up, and it's predominantly heroin at this point. Interviewer. Now, is Rosati just running protection for them? Is he moving things for them? Or what's his role in that specific operation? Do you know? Interviewee. He can give them intelligence. Interviewer. Oh. Interviewee. That's the big thing. If somebody is talking in Baltimore, D.C., he can't let them know, or Maryland. He provides intelligence. He gets paid. He can provide him with whatever he needs. If he comes up on a bust or something because he's always skimming stuff, he can move it through them. They'll gladly take care of what he comes up with. They were helping him previously when this big opioid crisis was going. He was coming up with 20, 30, 40,000 pills, opioid pills, of one kind or another during a month. 1 month. They helped him move it because he had pharmacists that were working with him in Maryland, ones that he was protecting. And they set it up, a softball thing. They set up nonprofit groups to launder all this money. But when he was just getting so much, 30, 40,000 pills, they had to move there. He needed their help to move that kind of stuff. But he provides intelligence to this day. Interviewer. Now, with this group you've just described, actually you mentioned one other Sean as an FBI guy. Sean. Interviewee. Henry. Sean Henry. He's just nasty. He's involved up to his eyebrows. His dirty trick squad, he was nasty. He's a lot like Strzok, thinks he's a computer expert, had no problem with sending information to any foreign government that would pay. He's all about the money. He's a CrowdStrike now. He's nasty. He's just a complete criminal with a badge, or previously. He's not FBI now, but he's still connected to them, still helps them with certain things, but he's a flat-out criminal. Interviewer. Okay. Now, was there any specific tie-ins with Roberts to this group, the things that they would do for Rosenstein? Was this group involved in any of those plotted murders of the Supreme Court justices that you know of, or local judges? Interviewee. They provided evidence. Not evidence, I won't say evidence. They provided intelligence from illegal surveillance of one kind or another to FBI people or to Sean Henry, who would take it to these FBI insiders, these false flag people who had infiltrated the groups. So they were getting it from both sides. Roberts certainly knew about it. He helped with FISA warrants, anything that he was connected to. He knew about that side, of course, because he wanted a say in who he would replace, who would be replaced. But Roberts wasn't involved in the day-to-day nitty-gritty of the dirty trick squad because it was just day in and day out, constantly nonstop. And it wasn't just all inaudible, and drive around and more driving. Things like this when they had some really nasty stuff to do, like with Cheryl Atkinson. They did that from an apartment complex. You drive around with a laptop until you find an open port and you go in through there. So he was involved in the higher level planning, but not necessarily the nitty-gritty of getting the intelligence and getting it to the FBI people. That would be Henry, who would get it to the FBI. Interviewer. Okay, well, I think that's all the questions we have for now. We'll probably reach back out if we have some more specifics that we want to get cleared up. Thank you for your time today, and we will be in contact. End of recording, end of transcript. Torture while in U.S. custody. Interviewer. Okay, so this one's going to be a little bit more unpleasant for you, but can you get into some of what happened to you when you ran afoul of Rosenstein and the Dirty Trick Squad and how they exacted their retribution on you? Interviewee: It was October 2009. Obama had been in the White House not that long, but everything had switched. The information I was providing from the doctor and from other sources was beneficial. They loved it. Nobody ever had that kind of access, especially a white Christian male, and it was fantastic. But when Obama came in, he switched it. Now it was being used against the country and to protect themselves, how their exposure happened. And they were arming terrorist groups for various reasons, allowing them to stockpile, allowing them to move money overseas to support terrorism. And I exposed it. I exposed my job, and then they came down on me. Rod sent Rosati and Utz, that's Gregory Utz, to arrest me. They claimed that a package had come from California that contained all manner of drugs in it, heroin, cocaine, everything. And so they arrested me and incarcerated me, arrested my wife, and they provided there was a FedEx number for that one, for the package. And interviewer: Who is this? You said Rosati and... Interviewee: This was Joseph Rosati, the DEA, and his partner at the time, Gregory Utz, who was a task force officer with the DEA, formerly with the Baltimore County Police in Maryland. And Rod sent them after me. These are his little henchmen. Interviewer: Had you ever been warned prior to this layoff what you had been digging on, or did they just kind of blindside you with it? Interviewee: No, what I was digging on was provided to them for various cases. Terrorist cases, finance cases, material support of the terrorist cases. But when it exposed them, there you go. And they were worried that I would talk, that I would tell them what was going on down here. So they sent a package, set it up in California, a big box with drugs in it. The FedEx number they provided was actually an overnight envelope, which wouldn't have held anything. It was a new patient package from a doctor's office. He provided a receipt and a letter, everything. And they apprehended me when I came to the mailbox place to get another box, and the person at the mailbox place actually provided a statement saying they handed it to them like 4 hours before that. So they brought it. It was never in the mail. They provided a postal service tracking number for that one as well. Said this box had come from California and that they had received a call from the manager of the place to inaudible. The tracking number, if you actually tracked it, had never been to California. It was a real tracking number that Gregory Utz had used to send a packet from Maryland to the ATF in Georgia. That was his application for a suppressor that he still owns. And it was tracked all the way to the ATF because it was an official document. So never in California, a total lie. There were no drugs in it. They said that there were pill bottles in there with pills, and the local police department logged them in as empty, and they found them in my apartment. So the local police were at least doing their job and covering it correctly. They tried to. I had firearms at the time. They took in 2 of the Colt rifles, the RF-15s, right in the police station, and took a Dremel tool to the receiver, trying to say that I had illegally modified a machine gun and more charges. And the police just went, these are feds. Norwalch's was a smaller town police department at the time, and they started documenting it. They were taking pictures of everything too because they were protecting themselves. They weren't necessarily hurting or helping me, but they were protecting themselves. And when that didn't work, they actually called their friend Borashak and had Borashak come out and get the guns. This was just 2 weeks after the arrest. He came up, confiscated everything, took it downtown and destroyed it so they couldn't prove they had tried that. They had me incarcerated in 2009, 2010 for 7.5 months. They starved me. They beat me. I lost 147 pounds in 4.5 months, over half my body weight. Regular beatings, regular torture. They would pick me up and take me out on their authority. They would do it down the road, in the car, wherever, depending on what time they had. It got so bad that there were prisoners in there, and correctional officers were trying to help me survive. The warden actually stepped up and got in touch with the sheriff and said this can't continue. And on their authority, they tried to get me out, but the judge was controlled. Interviewer: Now, were they interrogating you during the course of these beatings, or was this just... Interviewee: Oh, it was an interrogation. They wanted to know what I told them, what I had I ever made copies, where was it, what did I tell them about Baltimore, what was going on. That's what they were looking for. They went through my apartment. We had just moved. They went through the apartment in Baltimore County, and every single piece of paper in there, they had looked at it, and if it wasn't it, they ripped it up so they could tell they already checked it. It looked like confetti. They were looking for codes. They were looking for inaudible access. Interviewer: Now, did you come clean with everything that they were looking for, or they just thought you had more? Or were you just trying to protect the information that you'd uncovered? Interviewee: They knew I had access to it because I was working for them in Baltimore, so they didn't want any of that coming out. They wanted to know if I had made copies, if I had recorded anything. Because I'd made copies and recordings normally, they just wanted to know if I kept any. And they looked for them. I think they even got into the safe deposit boxes. They tore up our other apartment when they arrested my wife. They kept her handcuffed, no food or water for 23 hours, no warrant. They didn't apply for a warrant till the following day, so yeah. Unknown male: Wow. Interviewer: So when you were being taken out of the jail, what county was that jail in? Interviewee: Baltimore County, Maryland. Interviewer: Okay, so when you were being removed from the jail, were you being signed in and signed out? Interviewee: By them? Uh-huh. Interviewer: So there are existing records of every time? Interviewee: Yes. Interviewer: You were removed from jail? Interviewee: Oh, yeah. And when I came back, I was in such bad shape that they didn't want to sign me back in. They didn't want to be blamed for it. Interviewer: Interviewee: A couple of times I came back and I went right to medical, and I would stay there 3 or 4 days in medical to try to recover from what they had done. Interviewer: Are your medical records still available for that period of time in jail? Interviewee: Most of them are. Interviewer: Documenting your weight loss and your injuries upon return? Interviewee: Oh, yeah. And the surgeries necessary for repair and things afterwards. It got progressively worse when I wouldn't tell them because it was getting up towards the court date time when, it was put up or shut up and they didn't really have any leverage. So when I was coming back, when they did sign me out and bring me back, it got so bad the warden wouldn't let them sign me out anymore. And if they wanted to see me, they had to see me in the facility. Because they even took me to the courthouse one time, and they took me up on the 3rd floor where there's no cameras. It's mostly lawyers. Prisoners don't go there. And they again chained me down between my legs with belly chains, sat on my back, things like this, smacked me around. And again, I was so bad that the jailer at the courthouse did not want to accept me back into his authority, his custody, because he's like, I'm going to be blamed for this. Look at him. He's all cut up. So he documented everything, took pictures, and drove me right back. He didn't put me in cuffs. He drove me right back to the detention center, and they didn't want to take custody. So this was at the courthouse. So the warden and the sheriff were actually trying to get me out of their authority because it was wrong. So he wouldn't let them take me out, so they would come in and sign me out and take me up front in the administration section. And they were going to do whatever they wanted because they were feds. They didn't want anybody around. So we'd come back, and once again, I was in horrible condition, bleeding and busted up. Whatever, barely able to move. And the warden said, we're not doing this. So he told them that you can't use guns anymore. He wouldn't let them bring their guns in. These were federal agents. He was trying to help. So, Warden DeHaven, he's a nice man. So he wouldn't let them bring their guns in anymore. So again, they show up. Here comes, at this point, I've lost over half my body weight. I'm bleeding from every orifice. They practically have to scrape me up, put me in a chair, and get me up there, and they just continue their beatings. At one point I threw me on the floor and left me there. Like 3 days later, I'm in the same spot, and they come to get me, and they're kicking me because they're so mad that they couldn't have their fun again. I had about 8 inches of intestine distended from my rectum. It prolapsed because they kicked me in the stomach so much. So they took me up to the room, and I was so bad. When I came back, the warden, I've had enough of this. So the next time he said, I want to guard outside the room. Don't go in. I want to guard outside, an armed guard. He said, I want to know what you hear. He said, don't interfere. He said, I want to know what you hear. So with the guard outside, they were still so nasty and so violent that he stayed there the whole night after they were gone, after they put me back, to tell the warden the next morning. He stayed up all night to tell him how bad it was. So he said, next time, I want an armed guard in the room. This is the last. I want to see what they do. So he took one of his sergeants, armed, sat right in the corner and watched. And of course, with him in there, they toned it way down. And it was still so nasty, he called the warden at home that night and told him. And that was it. He barred them. He barred them after that. Interviewer. Now, why did the warden let it go on so long before he stepped in? Interviewee. Well, they were feds, and prisoners lie, prisoners exaggerate. But his own people saw it, and they were manipulating different staff members. The one time they take me out, he wouldn't let them take me out anymore. He wouldn't let them sign me out anymore because they had taken me out, took me down the road, and they were, doing their thing, chaining me down, beating me, stuff like this. And they got the idea to waterboard me. So he got this little mop bucket underneath the sink, and he said, fill it up with water. It was just a splash. It's not enough. It's not enough water to waterboard me. So I'm going to go out here and I'm going to tell them off. A bad situation. So he drags me back out. Now I'm chained to a chair, and they just drug me. They throw me over backwards, and they're standing over my shoulder, standing on my arm, because I'm belly chained. I'm completely in cuffs and ankle chains, everything. There are cans out there, 5-gallon gas cans of kerosene and diesel fuel. So he started pouring that in my face, basically waterboarded me with kerosene and diesel fuel. And that was the first time. I couldn't see. The burning was indescribable. It caused a lot of damage. I had to have 7.5 hours of reconstructive surgery inside to fix it as much as possible. It's all scar tissue now. I don't smell much. They had to remove bone up here and this bone just to get inside. And all those records are there. They know what that is. And they had arranged for things like this facility, Harcan Detention Center, had a MRSA outbreak at this time, and they took me out of one cell where I was laying on the floor most of the time and put me with some guy that had virulent MRSA. Interviewer. Oh. Interviewee. Hoping I'd catch it. Yeah, he was losing chunks of his scalp and hair, and I'm just staying on the bed, I can't move. I was very weak, and I was bleeding everywhere. So I woke up one day, and one of his scabs that he'd constantly picked off was in my ear, because he would pick them off the top bunk and just drop them down to where I was. So about the most I could do, I'd make it over to the sink, which was behind the toilet, to get water. And that would wear me out. I'd collapse. I was on about 600 calories a week. Not a day, a week. Interviewer. And why was the warden allowing you to starve like this? Interviewee. He was working. Rosati had control over a nurse in the medical, Iris, and that one doctor because they were both dirty. The doctor especially. He knew him from before, so he was just writing it off. And they brought in an outside doctor who at the end, he's like, he couldn't believe what it was. He signed on immediately. He's like, no. They kept it hidden. They lied to the judge. They would falsify paperwork. I mean, it's not like I can go to the judge and show him my condition. They're saying stuff like, I've got all the paperwork. They're acting like he's lying and he's exaggerating. He has lost weight, but most prisoners lose maybe, 10 to 20 pounds because when they get in there because of their diet and they can't snack anymore. No, I was like 76 pounds down at that time, and they lied. And I have all the paperwork. So yes, it was submitted to the court where I had the actual, medical paperwork showing you were down, where you lost it. And this particular judge at the time was a pedophile, a known pedophile. Interviewer. What's his name? Interviewee. William O. Carr. And Rod certainly controlled him. William Carr impregnated his own daughter and his daughter's last grandchild from her. When the child was born, he used his pull with the judgeship to have the daughter committed as crazy, whatever, and now he took away custody. And now he has custody of the daughter's last granddaughter, who I'm sure is in absolute hell, because he doesn't hide the fact that he abuses her. Well, he discussed it, but that's the interviewer. Do you know if they had leverage on this specific judge, Rosenstein, and interviewee? Oh yeah, they know who he is. Oh yeah, they have it. They may know of the specifics of everything he's done, yeah. They may have done the D&E thing from granddaughter/granddaughter, but interviewer, are you aware of any current leverage that's existing now that we could potentially shed light on? Interviewee, on who? Interviewer, John Connor, or anybody else that might be able to, or anybody else that might be under these types of influence. Interviewee, well, I mean, there's multiple judges. I mean, this was the whole focus of the Dirty Trick Squad, was to gain leverage, gain political leverage. They want to control both sides. They didn't care what side you're on. They wanted to control. They compromised judges. They compromised family members to compromise the judges. If they couldn't compromise a judge, they'd plan it. Well, some even had it done to themselves. Some of them are into that or something. They're into something. But if you weren't, they would compromise a family member. One judge, they couldn't get anything on him, so they compromised his son. His son was at college. He'd click the computer to record movies and everything, and they would just get in and download child porn, and it was like, oh, look, Your Honor, your son's downloading child porn. We can keep it quiet, but you got to work with us. These are the little things they did. This is how they did their job every day. Interviewer, so how did you end up getting released from this custody? What was the exit process, I guess, like? Interviewee, from the initial one? Interviewer, yes. Interviewee, well, they sentenced me. They figured out that there was just, I couldn't take that much abuse. The new doctor had come in. He was a part-timer. He rotated in. He was like, no. So he wrote, and he actually released me from jail at that point. They hadn't charged me or convicted me. Then they said I pled guilty. I didn't. The attorney they had working for them, who was actually a customer of Rosati's, multiple times that he had arrested and actually supplied stuff to, did cocaine in front of me at the jailhouse. He signed the plea agreement in my name. He said I was too incapacitated. He spelled white wrong because he was so high. That's not an easy one to misspell. But Thomas Moronic. But he actually spelled my name wrong. He said I was incapacitated and couldn't do it, so he signed it for me, which would be illegal. The day after I found out what he had done, I wrote to the judge just to get it on the record saying, you don't know what these people are doing. I'm working with them. There's all the stuff. I have a copy of that. They told me to leave the space for a court stamp so it'd be accepted, and I put it on the record. I said I did not sign it. I don't want to plea. I want my day in court. Because part of the plea was you have 10 days to nullify it and go to trial, which is a standard thing. And then I put in there and they're like, oh no, it was just a suggestion. You don't get that. So, and I fought for that case pro se by myself while being forced to work for these idiots. They gave me 1.5 years for that sentence. I was there for several months beyond that. Not beyond that, but of a year and a day, I did 7.5 months because at that point I was in such bad condition, they released me medically to a home detention situation and still forced to work for these people and maintain contacts with the terrorist groups, things like that, which I had come to feed them, but they controlled it much more after that. But I fought for the case pro se for years, 4 years, and finally, he, Carr, finally mean semi-retired, and I got assigned another judge. I went to a court and I won. She issued, because the evidence is plain. I have everyone backing me up. The post office, FedEx, the local police, the doctor. Everybody backs me up and it's plainly obvious. So she actually reversed it entirely in my favor. Interviewer: what year was that? Interviewee: August of 2014. Interviewer: okay. Interviewee: she issued a court order reversing the original one entirely in my favor, erased everything, even with a prejudice, so that they couldn't bring it back up. Well, Rod got to her and she reversed her court order. I have it. I have the original file. I have the original court order. I have all that. And she reversed it about 2 months later and put it back on and reinstated everything. That's just how they keep you under their thumb. Interviewer: are you aware of what he had on her to get her to do that? Interviewee: no. Interviewer: so after that, interviewee: I think it was just his position. Interviewer: after that escapade the first time, has there been any other? Interviewee: 2015. Interviewer: yep. Can you explain that one? Interviewee: again, I was the entire time forced to work with him as I gradually got healthier or recovered. Interviewer: when you say him, that's Rosenstein or? Interviewee: Rod Rosenstein. Interviewer: now, was Rosati and the others around this time too? Interviewee: yeah, the whole time. This was all the way up until 2016 when they started scattering, when Rod basically shut down the Dirty Trick Squad in 2016 because of the election. Didn't want anything to compromise it, didn't want it to come out, and to shut it down, and allowed Lisa Monaco to introduce the new CISSP section to the public, and she actually found a whole lot more legal stuff and reported it. But when they were planning to take out the judges, when they were working with these groups, and I was working in this group reporting back everything they were doing, and I got hundreds of conversations with these people. I recorded all of them, giving them to the FBI, but keeping a copy, and planting false flags and talking about the Boston Marathon bombing. Same group. So I do have those. I tried to end run because it got to the point where President Trump was coming on strong. It looked like he could actually take it, and they weren't going to wait, so I exposed it. Like I said, I end run them. I went around them. I went to the Department of Homeland Security with a ton of paperwork and a couple of 100 hours of audio and video. Gave it to them, and I don't know, overwhelmed. They got mad. I don't know what happened to them, but they went to the DOJ and the FBI, and it came right back on me, because they certainly knew who I was. And like I said, I'm sitting in prison again, and more BS charges. Going off of the first one, they said the drug charges, although there were no drugs there. In the first one, they just said there were drugs. There were no boxes. They were imaginary. But going off the first one, it was like, well, he's a previous offender, drugs. They said they got a surveillance warrant. They said they had observed me in a high traffic area for drugs. Later on, under oath, they had to admit that it was a Safeway. They had a pharmacy. That's how they claimed it, to get surveillance to keep it going. So they said, we didn't see him doing anything or engaging in any illegal activity, but he's in that known area, Safeway. We went grocery shopping, but it was enough. And they actually had to drop the charge later because there just was nothing there. There was no anything. There were no drugs, no nothing. The only thing was I had on my legal medication that I needed to try and recover from what they had done, quite a bit of that. And they had got the insurance fraud because I was taking one medication that was a single chemical medication. It had only one in it, which was easier for me to absorb. I have a lot of damage. The whole digestive system was scar tissue because of that. They were giving me insecticide and dichlorobos and barium sulfide, and it just ate through my whole system, and now I'm all scar tissue. So I balloon up like this, or I'll drop 50 pounds without thinking about it. It's not an easy balancing act. Anyway, I was getting medication from doctors, all legal and legitimate, Medicare and Medicaid paying for it, and they changed the formula. They actually sold the patent and changed the formula. All those records are there. They had to do this through the FDA and everything, so it's not like they can hide it. But I couldn't take it. I was taking it and getting violently ill, and I didn't know why, and we figured out that, they changed the formula, and I can't take it any longer. So I was getting it while the doctor was trying to find something that I could take, something that would work. And they said, well, you're not going to take it as directed. You have extra insurance fraud. So that's where the insurance fraud came from, and that's what they used for the second incarceration. They labeled me as a gang member, white supremacist, put me in a pod with 90 gang members, known gang members. I was the only white, bald guy there. All the rest of them were black guerrilla family or MS-13 of one version or another. That was an interesting few weeks. It was actually the Secret Service who helped me get into protective custody. Rod was worried because, inaudible, at the time, he's shutting everything down. This was to get me under control, especially since I went to outside channels. He arranged it, Sean Bridges, the Secret Service agent who was charged with the crimes in California and New York, that he was supposed to turn himself in New York. Well, Rod didn't trust him. He knew he's ruthless. He tried to make a deal. So Rod had him arrested and brought into the same facility I was at while he was in Maryland, because he lived in Maryland. But he wanted to know when he was talking. So everything had to go through Rod at that point to control it, and that's how he is. Interviewer. Now, would Bridges be willing to discuss any of this or comment on any of this, or is what would probably motivate Bridges to interviewee? What would motivate him? Interviewer. Yeah. Interviewee. He'd want to make a deal, something to benefit himself and some kind of money. Or if he knew previously about the noisy as all thing, like keeping it or something, he's going to want some kind of deal, but he can certainly corroborate. He can provide copies as well, but he has multiple copies of different things offline, or hard drives or thumb drives somewhere. His wife has actually destroyed one by accident. Interviewer. Would Bridges have the Pence tapes? Interviewee. Most likely, because he was the one who encrypted it. I know he was handed something like that because I know I copied them. I made the copies. I went to him for encryption, and if he saw something like that, he'd make copies, so more than likely he's got them. Interviewer. And you said his wife an immigrant, or is she an American? Interviewee. I believe she was born here. I actually knew her family longer than I knew him, and they knew my doctor that I was getting information from. They live very close, just a few minutes away from him. But she's a very talented young lady, but she's just as corrupt and nasty as he is. They're all about the money. Like I said, she was in charge of a couple of copies of stuff he had made. Very safe. I mean, he copied a lot of stuff, not just that, but bank accounts. And not just blackmail things, but any kind of financials that he could get at, something he could do. A lot of people, a lot of politicians have money hidden overseas. He could find it. He could get into it. So he wanted that. Once he gets down south, if he gets released and gets to south, man, he's going to rip them all off. Interviewer. Do you know his wife or his girlfriend, or it's his wife, you said? Interviewee. Ariana. Interviewer. Has she been... Interviewee. Esposito. Interviewer. Has she been Ariana Esposito, you said? Interviewee. Yes. Interviewer. Has she been involved in any kind of specific crimes that you can tie her to? Interviewee. She provided all kinds of contraband to him, communications to him prior to that. She helped him with her stuff. I mean, she would go out with him when he was doing various illegal activities. She helped launder money and proceeds that him and the others had accumulated illegally. She even got her mother to set up a tax service, a small business that could launder money, and set up small cleaning services to help launder proceeds that they were doing. So yeah, she was right in the middle of it. She was actually trained. She was in the academy, I guess, to be a state police officer when he was arrested. Interviewer. Interviewee. And she lost that position because of it. They weren't married at the time, just a long engagement. Then when he got arrested, they got married, so she couldn't testify. And then when he got sentenced, they got divorced. And now it's back to whatever version they have. Interviewer. Did you and Sean have interactions while you were incarcerated together, or were you separated? Interviewee. We did, with Rod and PJ Martinez, with other people, and most of them were independent. But yeah, we were actually together for a month or two. They actually put him on the same protective custody pod. Interviewer. So you've got a guy that would be out for blood when this is over, when he's finally out of jail. Interviewee. If he can get to South America where he has the money to protect himself, he's going to rip off a lot of people. He's going to rip off all the dirty politicians. I guess he has access to their stuff. He's the one who manipulated the Bitcoin market. He's the one that manipulated the Silk Road Task Force to get all the money, the Bitcoins that they had. Interviewer. So how were you released, and what has your life been like since that second incarceration? Interviewee. Well, there's a ginormous health problem since the first one, with all the beatings and all the poisoning and torture and stuff. My medical records tend to scare people because it actually has medical code for intentional poisoning on there, and people think I tried to kill myself, and I explain to them what it is so they can understand. And I had some decent doctors throughout time, but it's been nothing but a horrible balancing act health-wise. My wife's lost her daughter has not spoken to her since it happened in 2009. She didn't know she was married. She didn't know she's a grandmother, and has not seen or spoken to her daughter since 2009 because of this. Because her daughter believes everything the court says. Her daughter's actually an attorney, so she believes everything they say. So she's lost to me even more. But the health has been severely compromised. I do take several medications to help, hormone replacement being one of them, because they actually crushed one testicle beyond saving. I remember that night, and they damaged the endocrine system so badly that I have to take supplements and things to help with that, and other things to help me eat and digest, things like that, because it's all scar tissue. I don't absorb well, so I take vitamin supplements, things like that, to get what I need. I have to take large amounts of medicine because I don't absorb a fraction of it. And then in 2015, to get me, he used all that against you to cut you all off. He doesn't need any of that. I mean, they cut me completely off. So now you're going through withdrawals and they're interrogating you. I was interrogated multiple times by the FBI, the CIA, and Secret Service. That guy's Secret Service. It's all in the transcripts of the court. There's a very well-known 14-hour interrogation and then a 7.5-hour polygraph in one day, back to back, because they wanted to know what was going on, how exposed they were. They wanted to know what plans I had revealed. Interviewer. I hope you guys still have that polygraph interview. Interviewee. The FBI would have theirs and the Secret Service. The Secret Service would have theirs. They brought in their top polygraphers, nice people. They were very professional. It was long, after 14 hours of the FBI and 7.5-hour polygraph, no matter how nice they are, it was a long day. But of course, that has messed you up, and health issues deteriorate, and Rod, I'm working with Miss Atkinson on her case to expose this. Rod had me flagged in the system by Rosati, so they cut off filling any medication. I haven't had any medications in 14 months, so I am bleeding and bloated, and no, not in the best shape. Not as good a shape as I recovered to. I'll never be back to what I was, but I got to a decent place because I'm really bad. I use canes to get around and stuff. I guess it's just so weak. But it's not been a good one. I've been on probation until October of this year. Interviewer. So it's been, what's your employment? Your employment history has been like in the last couple of years. Interviewee. Sporadic. I was working part-time jobs, and I would work, and if the job got a little too physical or something, I would swell up. I couldn't work. It was hard to find work because you're a felon, and you can't hold any professional licenses or be bonded or anything like that. So you're relegated to small, odd jobs. Like I said, if it was something a little too physical, you couldn't do it long, you would flare up, and then you decommission for a month while your intestines heal back up, or you stop bleeding, or you're in the hospital again. There weren't many employers that would put up with it that long. So legally disabled because of it and working part-time as best I can right now. I have one that's fairly steady with some nice people. I'm very grateful for it because it's all we have. It becomes a little much occasionally, but they're nice people that work with me. Interviewer. So what has been your ultimate, that word, I can't say it correctly, but as far as coming forward, what are you hoping to see coming out of coming forward like this? It's a pretty bold move to come forward. Interviewee. Oh, yes, especially with a history of being stalked, to move forward. People need to know. These people are still out here. They're still affecting us negatively. They're still affecting tons of other people negatively. Look at what Pence just did to the president and the country. Like I said, I tried to come forward in 2016 to let the president know, because I was very excited he was there. But Pence, especially Ryan, consider him an outsider. He hasn't paid his dues enough. But I'm coming forward again, hoping that, if anybody looks at it seriously for 10 minutes, here's the paperwork. Look at it. Records. It's not from me. It's from FedEx or the post office. Just look at the crap, clear it up, because I can't get medical care. I can't work. I can't support myself. I can't do anything. Because when they did this, Rod was super Mr. Integrity, unanimously confirmed by both sides when he was, DAG and all of this. And everyone knows what they're like. Everybody can see plainly how these people are. And they've left a lot of damage in their wake, and they cover up their crimes and they keep it quiet. It's out there now. Everybody knows it. When I was talking about it before, nobody believed me. You're crazy. No matter what you provided, they're just like him? No way. And the judge in 2015, he told me, he said, he's the new DAG. He said, you're right. In this case, you're going to be wrong. He said, who do I want as an enemy? You or him? So, but it just needs to be fixed and it needs to be corrected as much as possible and restored. Interviewer. Now, as far as the active threat to you now, what do you sense in that regard? Interviewee. Well, there's definitely a threat. Since the last time stuff has come out in the last few weeks, there's been open threats to myself, my wife, lots of harassing and threatening phone calls. People are approaching my wife as a reporter trying to get information. Then when they can't, there's threats. Rod has stepped it up because not too long ago, when Miss Atkinson, Cheryl Atkinson, did an interview with the president, President Trump, and he said that, your case needs to be heard. This needs to be exposed. And Rod knew what he meant because I'm in that case. And so is Sean Henry, the FBI guy. So they knew what was coming. And the threats really ramped up then. So right now I have quite a target on my back still. Fortunately, the people, the only good part is those people are not in power anymore, but their friends are. But nothing's been fixed. Nothing's been fixed at all this time. And there's no way to defend yourself. There's no way to feel safe. And with a limited work available, with the constraints of the health, it's difficult to pack up and leave, to pack up and move, which we've done more than once for safety. Right now, Rosati, the one responsible for most of the health issues, has moved back from Delaware into Maryland, and he's roughly 20 minutes away from where I live. He doesn't know that, but I do. Borashak is half an hour the other way. They don't know where we're at. They moved there, so we're surrounded. But it's tense. It's a very tense situation. Interviewer. All right. Anything else? Unknown female. No, that's all. Interviewer. Do you have anything else you would like to add? Interviewee. No. That's just we're hoping this benefits people. Benefits the president on down. Somebody has to know that this was a planned coup. They had planned this. And I wrote 2 years ago online, A year ago, I wrote in July exactly what they were going to do because I knew about it. And you can look it up easy enough. It's right there. It was planned. Don't let them get away with it. Please. I need help desperately. But hey, take care of the country first. Interviewer. I guess the final question would be, are you aware of any specific people in the president's circle now that you would warn him about? Interviewee. Now? I did bring up one's overseers, the Italian job, as I called it. And that was Obama's connection to the computers and the voting and the stuff in Italy. This was online, Twitter. You can find it easy enough. And I was the one who was able to get some information out about Ron Yearwood and Jordan and all those guys. The president did confirm it in some fashion and fired them. And then the next one, the White House counsel, the president's counsel, the chief counsel, was able to confirm it where they fired them after I had gotten stuff to them. So some things did get through. But like I said, they lost a lot of control here in this country in 2016. So they needed shipping it overseas for 2018. And then obviously in 2020. And this one, again, Molly McCauley had uncovered and shared it with a few people who are also not here. Because this was control, they had to get some type of control back because the president had both houses and the presidency. Interviewer. All right. Well, thank you, Ryan. I appreciate it. Interviewee. How's your kid? End of recording. End of transcript. Continuing interview with Dr. John McGreevey by Lin Wood, law firm. Read by Lyndon Leaders. Interviewer. All right, again, thank you for sitting with us again. This is another video. We're going to ask that you tell us about Judge Sullivan and his affiliations and pedophilia allegations. Interviewee. I met Gail Sullivan Jr., the judge in the General Flynn case. He's disgusting. He's a known pedophile, a friend of Biden's. He's the one that owned the homes that Biden used for his inaudible. Sullivan likes young girls. He has abused his granddaughter for years. When she got older, he lost interest, and she actually dated her own father intimately. He took her to the prom, things like that. She bragged about it online. I have all those records. She bragged on Facebook and things about dating her father, and he was really good and, very generous and all that stuff. But both the father and the son are vehement racists. They don't like black people. They think black people bring them down. They make them look bad because they're so good and other people are so terrible. That's why they like ripping off Howard University, because it's not going to do them good anyway. They're nobody. It's a strange concept to me anyway. But he, Sullivan, the judge, when the granddaughter was younger, she was on Skype in her bedroom. This is one of the videos I've seen. She was on Skype in her bedroom, and this was when Skype was fairly new, and she heard him coming and she jumped into the bed. He didn't know it was on. Like I said, it wasn't common at the time. She was talking to one of her friends, so he comes in and abuses her. He gets in her bed and she's performing oral sex on him, and he's like, mildly abusive, I guess. He says, "Do like I told you, not like this." Ugh. So, but what he wasn't aware of is that the other people were seeing this because it scared the children on the other end of Skype, so someone got their parents. There was nothing they could do. They didn't discuss it. Some of them will discuss it. They actually witnessed it as it was happening because they don't like it. So if somebody were to offer them something decent, they would come forward with what they saw. Interviewer. One of the families screen recorded this. Is that what you believe happened? Or interviewee. Somebody had a recording of it because I've seen the recording. I don't know which inaudible was made. I don't know which family member recorded it. Interviewer. Interviewee. But they were able to do so, so there is a tape of it, and you can clearly see him when he walks in. That's him. The poor child has never known anything but hell. She, like I said, they're racist, him and his son, and they told her she was nothing but garbage her entire life, to the point where she hurt herself trying to lighten her skin. And if you see her online, she's actually changed her appearance, lightened her skin so much she looks Asian, because she doesn't want to be black, because they've always told her that was horrible, horrible, horrible. But she's altered herself that much now, she doesn't look like she did when she was a child. She doesn't even look black. She looks Asian. And that's because of the abuse that continues, abuse from all of them and what they had told her. She was worthless. So yeah, that's how Judge Sullivan is. As I said, he owned the homes that he's allowed this to take place in, and other people would visit. And people would go to the shore, go to the beach, and that was the code. They had 3 or 4 of them that Biden would use. All basically the same, single-family homes, large, 2-car garages that could be closed, and the child normally in there. Interviewer: and you said Judge Sullivan offered his granddaughter to Biden, and Biden turned this down. Interviewee: yeah. Biden doesn't like black people at all, but especially black girls he has no interest in. He's a racist. He's a turd. There was an incident where it was reported that it was the judge's son, Sullivan's son, where he had raped the granddaughter, his granddaughter, and raped her very bad. She had to go to the hospital. There are hospital records for this. And there was another girl present there at the same time. There was actually 2. Well, it wasn't the son. It was actually the judge who did it. He had raped them both and got very violent and left the girls on the floor. Didn't care. But it was Biden who had, basically told him, he was like, I don't want this crap around here. Too close to exposing him. So he, the judge who had committed the rape, got his son to take the rap for him, and he got him to immediately move. Go back to Maryland, where he turned himself in. As a judge, he could control it. Now, if the judge was arrested, he had no control. But they wanted to first and foremost move it away from Biden to get it out of Delaware, and they did, even though the records and everything happened up there. So they moved it out of Maryland. The son, he took charge for his father, because if you charge the son, he can't help the father. Political. And then they just buried it with the help of Rod Rosenstein, Elijah Cummings, and Catherine Pugh, who, Cummings, is obviously deceased, but at the time, he was very big in Maryland politics. Catherine Pugh was the mayor of Baltimore. And it's still in the books. You can find it if you look on case search in Maryland, like in the federal system, PACER. It's still in there. You could find it. Interviewer: what year was that? Interviewee: 2012. I want to say off the top of my head, but you can find it. And then made it disappear, and the father and Rod, or why they helped cover it, to protect Biden and exposing anything else. Years later, he was picked up, the son, in an internet child porn sting in Maryland, and this came up. And because they crossed, the same type of thing. He was buried down to the same people. Rod did it, and everything, buried that one. He was trading pictures online. And there you go. So they buried that one, too. He got away with everything. So there's definitely leverage over the judge. Interesting. Interviewer: yes, just a relationship with Obama and Biden. Obama's probably aware of all this. Interviewee: Obama? Certainly. Well, Eric Holder is great friends with Judge Sullivan, and so is Elijah Cummings, and they're all great friends with this stuff. Sullivan was even aware in some fashion about the plot with the Supreme Court because of Holder, who was tapped to be one of the Supreme Court justices' replacements. But Sullivan and Holder are very, very close, and they've helped each other many times. So yeah, they were certainly aware of that. Obama certainly knew. Obama would send Biden back with anything he wanted to keep it quiet, just to keep him out of their hair in D.C. Biden very rarely, if ever, stayed in D.C. overnight. There was always a caravan back or something, a train back. Interviewer: okay, I guess we can call it there. End of recording, end of transcript. Interviewer: okay, Ryan, we're just going to ask you one more. Discuss a little bit more about what you know about Joe Biden and his predilections towards young children and pedophilia and child pornography, and what you're aware of from the conversations you've had with Rosenstein and the Dirty Trick Squad. Interviewee: Biden's a well-known pedophile. It's disgusting. Me and Mrs. We've seen him and family members, him and other children. Most people have seen now the image of him sniffing children on in an official capacity. It's an award ceremony or a promotion ceremony. And many times he can't wait is a problem. It's not like he's just going over there and doing that. Those children have been promised to him for his role in the securities position for their family members, for their parents. So he can't control himself because he's anticipating his payoff. So that's why you see these sniffing videos, things like that. Some of them are just him being a disgusting pervert. The other ones, these are payments that he's going to get soon, that night, because he had come through on his. Obama would make all kinds of deals, promote people into this or that, but he always had to get his percentage as 10%. He had to get something to keep him quiet. There's just unbelievable amounts of child porn online, and the DOJ has terabytes of it. But anything confiscated, anything used was formatted for him for easy use by Sean Bridges. And it would play. You could just click one thing. Because he wasn't very computer savvy. He could just play, and it would play you through everything that was on there due to the format, because many of the things were different types of files. Phone, camcorder, this or that computer. And he would put them on there for him and separate pictures and videos as one click. Then you could go through. And that's one of the jobs Bridges had. They would be supplied to him, then he would go off to Delaware, and that's how he kept him happy and quiet and kept him out of Obama's hair. But he never spent any time in D.C. at night. He'd always go up there to Delaware. As far as Delaware, there's a judge, Emmett G. Sullivan. He owns, or he did own, I think he's sold it a couple of times now, but he was the one who owned the homes in Lewis, Delaware. He owned 3 or 4 homes. They were all the same small, single-family homes with a double-car garage with a door, and these were the homes that Biden used to be supplied with children. And Sullivan is the same way, but he was doing things there with his little granddaughter and everything, and so was one son. But these are the homes that they used, and Sullivan owned them. Like I said, he has sold a couple since then, but the records are all there now. They're all already obtained. They're about 20 minutes away from Biden's compound in Delaware. And he was to be brought in the backseat or SUVs and ride in, and the other person showed up, and most of the time they were ahead of time. He would just come in, spend whatever time he had in the back, and go out, and nobody saw a thing. Delaware is also a huge smuggling operation. Not well known, but I mean Delaware is a good corporate state, for corporate protection, but it's also a humongous haven for registered yachts. Interviewer. Yeah. Interviewee. Thousands upon thousands of yachts are registered there, and they're also used for smuggling. I mean higher-end children, which is disgusting to even say, but the higher-end clients, the guests, the ones they pay more, through Delaware into New Jersey and New York and down. It's one of the biggest pit stops for smuggling these children to the higher-end clients into D.C. and then go. Interviewer. Are you aware of any of the types of children that Biden would mostly request? Interviewee. He had boys too. He liked girls. He preferred girls. Interviewer. Age range? Interviewee. Pretty much anywhere like 5, 6, up to 14, 15. He didn't care. He preferred 12 or 13. He did not like black girls. I know that was a problem. Sullivan had offered his granddaughter, and he wouldn't do it because he thought they were all dirty. Biden's like that too. He's disgusting in every way. But, so yeah. Interviewer. Are there any suits or any complaints against Biden for these types of allegations? Interviewee. Really, they've been quiet. They were all kept quiet. They've been manipulated. His wife is nasty. His wife knew what he was like when she was married to him and hidden it all along. When he was on the campaign trail before this one, obviously he couldn't be supplied with his normal appetite of children. So they sent his little granddaughter or the nieces out to keep him quiet and happy on the campaign trail in these various states. These poor children have never known anything but abuse and terror. So she, his wife that managed all that, gave him access to the special children in the school that she worked at years ago. Interviewer. Are there any rumors of tapes with Biden on it moving around the interviewee? There are. Biden's a lot smarter about that than his son, obviously, but there are tapes. Interviewer. Uh-huh. Interviewee. Hunter supposedly had some of them, but there are videos that he's made. There are Skype videos where it's him, but it's from here down with a child doing this where he's talking to someone else, and you can't see the face. We can identify him by nipples or something, but it's him. So he's just a lot more suave about that. He's a political a long time, and he's more careful. Interviewer. Uh-huh. Interviewee. I don't think he carries a phone anymore. His staff takes care of phones, so there's nothing really close. Interviewer. What can you tell us about the Hunter Biden abuse? Was there any abuse towards Hunter by him? Interviewee. Oh, yeah. Interviewer. That you know of? Hunter Biden as you know individual? Interviewee. Yeah. It was his other son that was the one he picked to be the political successor. Interviewer. Oh, Interviewee. And Bo actually covered up a big abuse scandal at the hospital. This one doctor and many other things Bo had covered up. Stuff, accusations against Biden, Joe Biden. He was Attorney General before he passed away, and he covered up cases and accusations against Joe Biden. He had covered up a doctor at the hospital with over 1,000 victims. And Biden has copies of that, and he was provided by his son, Bo. He was given copies of everything the doctor had. The doctor was videotaping this stuff in the office when he was abusing over 1,000 children, and he was given copies of it. Loved it. As far as Hunter's laptop, I haven't seen it. What I've been told from them was that the FBI got it originally, and they immediately went through and took out anything that would implicate them or Biden or anything like that. But the one that came from the repair shop is the whole copy that's still on there. So the original FBI copy is not going to match the one they've got now. So, interviewer. Gotcha. Okay, anything else in here? Interviewer. So, I guess the main tie-in for you for most of this information has been through Sean Bridges, as he was editing and putting those things together to be given to Biden. Are there any other corroborating accounts of other people that have been in your circle that would be able to back these up as far as interviewee? Well, yeah. I mean, there's the other people in the Dirty Trick Squad. I mean, that absolutely exists. There are actually references to it in court documents. I've referenced it in court documents. But good luck with them. I mean, they're going to be admitting what? Murder? Interviewer. Uh-huh. Interviewee. Planning child porn, treason, sedition. I mean, you have to make a hell of a deal to get them to talk. Interviewer. Yeah. Interviewee. But I mean, I certainly know what's going on. They certainly know me. The FBI is not going to talk. They're dirty as the day is long. They should be disbanded. Interviewer. All right. Well, thank you, Ryan. End of recording. End of transcript.